Hello, everyone. I pray your day is going well. So, I want to share something with you that was very interesting to me. So, on today, I was minding my business early and it just brought back to my remembrance. So, I was sitting on a couch and all of a sudden I heard something like fall. And I knew it came from my bedroom. And so, when I walked into my bedroom, I kind of looked around and I kind of played back in my mind the sound that I heard, and I knew it wasn't nothing heavy. So I was like, okay, it might have fell from somewhere in the restroom. So I go into my restroom, and in my mind, I was like, you know what? The way it sounded like it was one of my razors that was sitting in a certain particular location. But although I have other little light things that's also in my shower, but when that fell, I just kind of played it in my head, the sound that it could have been. And when I go into my shower, come to find out it was a razor. And so you might ask what the razor got to do with this girl. Well, listen. So after that fell, I went and I picked it up, put it back where it needed to go, and I walked away. And when I walked away, God began to talk to me through that sound of that razor. And so God said, you see how when that item had fell, you was able to distinguish it among all the other ones, although that wasn't the only light item that could have fell onto the floor. You could have thought about everything else that was light that could have sounded like what had fell onto the floor, but you knew that it was a razor. He said that is the same thing as it relates to me. Don't never think that although it's so many people on this earth that God cannot hear your voice. God cannot hear your prayer. And I'm here to tell you, God hears everything that you are saying. He knows your voice. He knows you among all the other people that is around you. And that's what God began to tell me, is that the way that sound is, or the way that you reacted to the sound, knowing what it was, I am your father. So I know your sound, your voice among all my other children. And I'm pretty sure many of y'all can relate to this. Those that have children, when you're taking your child to the park and all the other kids are out there and they've let that one child start crying, you know the sound of the cry of your own child. You go to the school and you picking up your children and there are so many kids running around. And if that one child says a certain particular word, you know that child among all the other children. And what God's saying is that's the same thing with him. He know our voice. He know our sound among everyone else that is out here in this world. And then what was also interesting, not only that he gave me that part, but he also gave me the part of when I heard the sound. Now, I could have stayed in the living room. I mean, that was a light sound. It wasn't nothing big. I could have said, okay, well, I'll get it later. I don't feel like getting up. But I got up to go look and see what it was. And what God began to tell me, he said, see, a lot of times people want to move on the sound of a loud sound, but they don't want to move on something that is small. He says, see, I talk not only through the loud voice of things, but I also speak among the small ones. So what I'm telling you is God is speaking to somebody, and I don't know who this for, but God is speaking to you. And although it's not a loud sound, you got to be careful to pay attention to the small sound. See, reason why I moved because I felt like I needed to move. But it wasn't a push enough for me to say, Angie, you better move. But I moved because I was kind of curious about not only what I was thinking, but would it actually turn out to be what it was that I was thinking? You know, I was kind of challenging myself from the sound and with what I thought. And that's how we have to be. When God is speaking in those small, still voices, we need to be careful to move, because in the midst of those small, still voices, there's some anointing upon that move. And if you don't move on the behalf of that sound, you can miss something. Because I look at what transpired with me. I could have sat down and stayed in the living room, but because I got up to go look for that sound and figure out what it was, which God gave me a revelation through that little move. It didn't move me strongly, but I was curious. And that is how God wants us to be. Listen to the small, still voice. God is speaking. God is talking. And I want to encourage you to train yourself to focus on those small, still voice. Ask God, God, when you speak to me through the small, still voice, give me the ability to recognize your voice, recognize the move in my spirit that you're telling me to do a certain particular thing, although it's not a push, but I know it's you. But I'm going to tell you this, in order to get that, you have to get in the presence of the Lord. You have to establish a relationship, a communication with God. Because when you establish something like that, then you will begin to recognize his voice in those small, still settings versus the loud ones, the ones that saying, hey, here's a red light, you know. So in conclusion to this, as I have said earlier at the beginning of this or whatever, trust those small, still voices and don't be afraid to challenge those small, still voices so that way you can learn the voice of God. Because I challenged myself, which was to think it could have been this, it could have been that, it could have been this, but let me move to see. Because it doesn't do no good to think without moving in action. Because although I was thinking, I would never found out what it was at that moment, maybe later, but I probably would have forgot about what I was thinking. You know, anything could have transpired. But I needed to move at that moment, which was the anointing was on it, even though I didn't feel the anointing was on it and that I was going to get a message out of it. But I moved. I moved. And when I did, God gave me revelations. Sometimes you will have to move on that little feel that you get that God is asking you to do something, even though he's not telling you so loudly in your ear that, hey, you need to get out of that relationship. Hey, you need to do this, you need to do that. Whatever the case may be, you may not get that loud voice, but that small, still voice, God talks to us through that because he wants us to recognize all the different vibration of his voice, of his move. Because if we get stuck on one setting, then we can miss everything else. So I'm here to tell you, work on paying attention to the small, still voices when God speaks. I just want to share that with you because it really blessed my spirit when that happened. Have a great day. Be blessed. As Jesus Christ loves you, I love you too.